Welcome to our live training session here with our Sport Front-Wheel Drive Acura Integra. We're going to learn how to calibrate and tune this vehicle using an Emtron SL8 standalone ECU. Let's jump into some details about our vehicle. It's going to have a built B-Series engine, so it's a B18A bottom end, a B18C cylinder head. The bottom end has been strengthened with forged pistons and rods and ductile iron sleeves. It's been punched out to an 84 mil bore, and it's roughly a 10-to-1 compression engine. On the top end, or the cylinder head, we have forged valves and valve train. We have upgraded camshafts that have locked VTEC function, so the VTEC is no longer present, and we're always riding on the high cam at all times. In addition to this, we have a Pro J intake manifold and a 90 mil throttle body. Now moving on to the turbo side of things, we have a custom turbo kit using a forward-facing equal-length style manifold, a Tile 60 millimeter wastegate, a Borg-Warner S369 turbocharger, a custom front mount intercooler built into the kit, and custom charge pipes, along with a Tile blow-off valve. Now moving on to the fuel system side of things, we have a mechanical Weldon fuel pump that's driven off the camshaft. We have a Weldon fuel pressure regulator, custom lines, a custom fuel cell. We're running ethanol in the actual fuel system, and we're running dual sets of FID 2000cc injectors. We're gonna have plenty of fuel flow rate for feeding this engine, making high horsepower on our ethanol-based fuel. Now, in addition to all this, we have a whole bunch of different sensors that we need to configure and set up, such as fuel pressure, oil pressure, exhaust manifold pressure. We have a boost control solenoid we're going to be working with to turn up the boost for boost control. We also have a strain gauge that's built onto the shift handle for the 4-speed G-force dog box. So we're going to be able to measure our shift force and perform clutchless upshifting, allowing us to stay in boost between shifts and greatly improving our acceleration rate in this drag race application. We have a lot to cover and talk about. Let's jump into our very first tutorial here, learning how we can set up all the inputs and outputs on our Emtron to begin our live training process. Welcome to our live training session here with our Sport Front-Wheel Drive Acura Integra. Now we just went over all the details of the vehicle. Let's jump into our Mtune software so we can begin creating our base file, get our engine fired off, and start our live training process. So the first thing we're going to be doing here is jumping in and uploading a file to our Emtron box. Now we're dealing with an SL8 box from Emtron, so we're going to go and find an associated base file that we can upload so that we can use that as a starting point. And we're going to go through in this tutorial and account for all of the details specific for the inputs and outputs. And the next tutorial, we're going to go through and setting up all the tables, so the 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional tables such as fuel and spark and boost control and all those other details in order to get the engine to fire off. So we're splitting our base map creation here into 2 separate parts. First, we need to account for all input outputs, and then we can go through and set up and configure the tables based on the configuration and details of our setup that we're working with. So I want to essentially break these apart here and create 2 separate tutorials, just so we're very straightforward. If you want to watch just how to set up inputs, outputs, you can have one video dedicated for that, and another one for going through and setting up and configuring all of the tables to create a safe starting point to fire up the engine. So the first thing we're going to do here is actually go in, and right now, just so we can describe the situation I'm in here, I'm in the vehicle is powered on, I have my Ethernet cable plugged into the Emtron, which is plugged into my laptop. We can see down at the bottom here, we have a status that's showing ECU detected in blue, so my laptop is connected via Ethernet to our Emtron. Now what we're going to do is look at our options that we have here. So we have Open ECU, Live Data, Send Cal to ECU, Open Log, Download ECU Log, and Update Firmware. Now this is on the latest firmware, so we don't need to do a firmware update, but we do need to go in and upload a file that's associated for an SL8 ECU. So what we're going to do here is go to Send Cal to ECU, and it's going to prompt us to select a calibration file. Now it's going to go automatically to our C drive Emtron cal file folder. This folder exists when you download and install the Mtune software on your laptop. It'll automatically populate this folder with files in it. We can take a look in this particular folder here. We're gonna have an SL sample file. That's what we wanna go and start off with. Now that's not going to start and run this engine, but it's gonna be a starting point that's specific to our SL series boxes from Emtron. We also find we have a KV sample, so if you have a KV box, you'll select that file to begin with. Now if you have a plug and play file from Emtron, that you definitely wanna go ahead and use that, but in this case, I don't have a whole lot of options or choices here in order to start going in and uploading a different kind of SL file. So I'm going to start off with the generic file and set everything up from start to finish with this file so that it's going to be specific to the car and all the modifications and the wiring that we're dealing with. Now I know all my inputs and outputs, so that's going to be something that you have to know in order before you jump in to set up input and output configuration in your base map, going in and creating it. You have to have that information. If you have a custom harness for your Emtron, you're going to have the harness maker give you a pinout chart of knowing where all the pinout locations are going to be, and then you can go and fill in the rest. But we need to go and make sure you have all that detail available. Now again, I have that written down right next to me here in a notepad, so I'm going to be able to reference that as we're building the file out. So what we're going to do is grab our SL sample file. We're going to go and upload this to the ECU. So we've clicked that option here, send cal to ECU. We're going to select this file. I'm going to click open, and it's going to tell me now that there's a firmware difference between the file type and the firmware on the box. The file has an older firmware build where the box is running a newer firmware build. That's okay. We're going to go and make sure that we account for all of the details in this file. We don't really care if it's slightly off in terms of our firmware, if it's created from an older firmware. It'll try to auto update a couple things within the actual file itself so that it's more compatible with the 2.1, in this case 2.18 firmware. So we're going to let it do that, but it's warning us there could be compatibility issues. We're going to create this whole base file from scratch, so we're not really worried about that at the moment. Let's click OK and allow it to do its uploading process here. It's going to show us the status bar indication. Once this reads 100%, that's going to mean that it's fully uploaded. Now, again, this file has to be all set up. Nothing is going to work in terms of this particular vehicle. So things like our map sensor, definitely not going to be calibrated right. Things like our wideband, definitely not going to be calibrated right. So we have to account for all that. We can see right now it's showing the following parameters have been changed since being sent to the ECU. So these are going to be things that are specifically need to be altered in order to work with the 2.18 firmware. So the file was created with 2.17. We're uploading it to the ECU. It's changing all these. We're going to go through and turn a lot of this stuff off. We're not going to be using most of what we see here in the list. Actually, none of it we're probably going to see and use, but we're going to go and make sure we have accounted for all this. So let's click OK. And when we allow this to go in and finish its store successfully here, we can see it's going to give us a status update right there. So it's stored that and uploaded that to the ECU. We can now go to Open ECU. If we go to Open ECU, it's going to connect us live to the ECU where we can start to stream data and start to actually work with programming the Emtron. So this is the file that's been loaded. This is a SL series generic file from Emtron. And we can see here that we're looking at the main VE table, which is found here. If we look at our cursor, fuel, main VE, this is going to be looking at the main VE table, this particular look in this particular window. Now again, we're not going to be focusing in this tutorial on any two-dimensional or three-dimensional table updating or altering. We're going to be focusing on setting up our inputs and outputs and making sure that those are configured properly. This is super critical in order to make sure that if we're referencing, let's just say, speed density calculations in your main VE table and your efficiency calculation is based on map pressure, that the map pressure is actually calibrated right and it's tracking along properly here in the load indexing to the table. So that's very basic, but one thing that we have to make sure is right. So let's go ahead and do that right now. We're going to go up here into Configure and start to set up our inputs and outputs. Now what we're going to do here in the Configure window, and this is primarily where we're going to focus all of our attention in this tutorial, we're going to start off here into Engine Setup and go through all of our windows and go and work our way all the way over to Functions. So we're going to be setting up inputs and outputs and all of the actual configuration details, such as number of cylinders, engine displacement, and trigger patterns and all that information. So we're going to set that here in this video, focus on setting up our table data in the next tutorial. Okay, so let's jump in here to Engine Setup and let's start off over here into Engine Main. This configures the engine details for the fuel and airflow modeling that we have to work with here. So we need to go and account for the number of cylinders that we're dealing with. This is going to be setting how many injector outputs, how many coil outputs are going to control the engine, and it also needs to know this for a multitude of other calculations. So we have a 4-cylinder engine. This is a Honda B18 engine. This is a 1.8 liter engine. So in this case, it's a 4-cylinder. Inline 4-cylinder engine. The engine size here, we need to go and be specific with this. This is part of the airflow modeling. We need to know how much displacement we're able to fill in terms of the cylinders and how much volume is in the cylinders. So, thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.